I had 63 years on this earth, and I thought I'd seen enough of life to know when something was wrong. I was wrong about that. It was a Tuesday morning in early March, and my daughter had just called to say she was coming over to help me sort through some paperwork. That's what she called it. Paperwork. Like we were just going through old utility bills or grocery receipts. She didn't mention that the paperwork was my will. She didn't mention that she'd already called the attorney's office herself to schedule the appointment. I only found that out later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Vincent. Wait, no, let me start the way I always start things. With the truth. My wife passed 3 years ago this February. Lung cancer. She never smoked a day in her life, and the universe decided that didn't matter. Her name was Loretta, and for 38 years she was the person who kept me honest. Kept me humble, kept me from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize in the mirror. When she died, something in the house went quiet that has never come back. We had 2 children. My son lives out in Phoenix now with his wife and their 3 kids. We talk on Sundays. He's a good man. Steady, quiet, works hard. He reminds me of Loretta sometimes, the way he thinks before he speaks. My daughter is different. She's always been the one who moved fast, talked fast, wanted things now. As a little girl, she'd unwrap her Christmas gifts before anyone else was awake. Loretta used to laugh about it. That one came out of the womb ready to negotiate, she'd say. We thought it was ambition. We were proud of it even. We paid for her college, helped her put the down payment on her first house, co-signed a car loan when she was 26 and her credit was still rebuilding. I'm not saying any of that to keep score. I'm saying it because when what happened finally happened, I kept going back through all of it, trying to find where things went wrong. I still don't have a clean answer to that. Last November, my daughter started coming around more. At first, I was grateful. After Loretta passed, the house got lonely in ways I hadn't expected. Not just the silence, but the small things. Nobody to share coffee with in the morning. Nobody to notice when I was quiet for too long. My daughter would stop by on Saturday afternoons, bring food, ask how I was sleeping. She'd sit on the back porch with me and we'd talk about her kids, about the neighborhood, about nothing in particular. I should have noticed that she always found a way to bring the conversation back to the house. Dad, you ever think about downsizing? Dad, you know the property values on this street have gone up significantly. Dad, it's a lot of house for one person. I'd change the subject. She'd let it drop. And then a few weeks later, it would come up again from a slightly different angle. In December, she mentioned she'd been talking to a financial advisor, someone who had helped her and her husband restructure some of their investments. She said the man was brilliant, very experienced with estate planning, and that I should consider sitting down with him. I told her I already had an attorney who handled my affairs and had known me for 15 years. She nodded and didn't push it, but she brought it up again in January, and then again in February. And then one morning in early March, she called and said she was coming over to help with some paperwork, and she had someone she wanted me to meet. The man she brought with her was not a financial advisor. I found that out about 40 minutes into the meeting after he'd spread several documents across my dining room table and started explaining what each one was. There were 2 things on that table that gave me pause. The first was a document that would establish a joint trust, one that would give my daughter co-ownership of this house immediately, not upon my death. The second was a power of attorney form that was already filled out, already notarized on her signature line, just waiting for mine. I'm 63 years old. I'm not infirm. I'm not confused. My doctor told me 2 months ago that my blood work looked like a man 10 years younger. I had no reason to sign a power of attorney over anything. I looked at my daughter across the table and I asked her calmly, "What is this for?" She smiled. "It's just protection, Dad, in case something happens to you." "I'm fine," I said. "You're fine now," she said, "but you're not getting younger." That sentence landed different than she meant it to. I looked at her eyes when she said it, and something in them was doing a calculation. Not grief, not worry, something else. I told them I needed to use the restroom. I excused myself, went down the hall, and called my attorney from my cell phone. His name is Leonard, and he picked up on the second ring the way he always does. I told him as quietly as I could that I was sitting across from documents I didn't recognize, prepared by someone I'd never met, and that my daughter was in the next room. There was a brief silence on the other end. "Don't sign anything," he said. "I mean nothing, Vincent. Not even your name on a notepad. I'm calling you back in 10 minutes. I went back to the dining room. I told them Leonard had some questions and we'd need to reschedule. The man gathered his papers without much expression. My daughter held her smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She hugged me at the door and said we'd talk soon. Her husband, who had waited outside in the car the entire time, I only saw him as they pulled out of the driveway, didn't come to the door at all. Leonard called back 12 minutes later. What he told me turned my stomach. The power of attorney document my daughter had presented was not a standard form. It had been modified, subtly, in the kind of language that a person without legal training might read right past, to give her not just authority over medical decisions in the event of incapacity, but full financial authority effective immediately upon signing. The joint trust document was structured in a way that would have transferred equity in my home to an LLC registered in her husband's name last September. Leonard had seen this kind of thing before. Not often, but enough to know what it was. This is not estate planning, he told me. This is asset extraction. I sat down at my kitchen table after I hung up. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the Saturdays she'd spent on the back porch with me. I thought about all the time she'd asked about the house, about downsizing, about property values. I thought about the fact that she had come into my home with a man she introduced as a financial advisor and who was, in reality, an associate of her husband's. Leonard found this out within the hour, through the Bar Association database. The man had no credentials in financial advising. His background was in real estate transactions. I thought about Loretta, about how my wife in her final weeks had taken my daughter's hand and said, "Take care of your father," and I thought about how my daughter had nodded with tears in her eyes, and how I had genuinely believed that she meant it. I did not call my daughter that evening. I needed to think. Leonard came to my house the next morning with a yellow legal pad and the recorder, and we spent 2.5 hours going through everything I could remember, every conversation about the house, every mention of the financial advisor, every detail of the March meeting. He told me what my options were. He also told me that what my daughter had attempted was not necessarily a crime in the way people imagine crimes. There was no violence, no forgery on my signature, but that if I had signed those documents, unwinding them would have required litigation that could take years and cost more than most people had. "You got lucky," he said. "You left the room." I know. Here's the part I haven't told many people. About a week after the meeting, my daughter called me, not to explain, not to apologize. She called to ask when we could reschedule. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying she understood I was overwhelmed and that she just wanted what was best for me. I played that message 3 times, and each time I noticed what wasn't in it. There was no, "I'm sorry." There was no, "Dad, I should have been upfront with you about what those documents were." There was nothing that indicated she understood that she had done something wrong. There was only a pivot, a reframe, a gentler approach to the same destination. My son flew in from Phoenix that weekend. I hadn't planned to tell him. I didn't want to create a war between them, but he could tell something was off the moment he walked in the door. He sat across from me at the kitchen table the same way Leonard had, and I told him everything. He didn't say much for a while. He just stared at the table. Then he said, "Dad, how long has she been doing this?" And that question broke something open in me because I realized I didn't know. I didn't know when it had started. I didn't know if the Saturday visits had ever been just visits or if they'd always been reconnaissance. I didn't know what she had already looked through when I left her alone in the house, or what conversations she'd had with her husband at night about me, about this property, about what I was worth. I spent 2 weeks in a kind of grief I didn't have a name for. It wasn't like losing Loretta. That grief was loud and physical and came in waves I could at least identify. This grief was quieter and stranger. It was the grief of realizing someone you loved had been performing love at you for longer than you knew. Leonard advised me to update my estate documents completely. New will, new beneficiaries, new power of attorney, assigned to my son. I also put the house into a revocable living trust in my own name, which closed the avenue my daughter had been trying to open. I met with Leonard's estate attorney colleague, a woman named Bev, who had done this work for 30 years and who explained everything to me in language that was plain and clear. She said something during our second appointment that I've thought about many times since. She said, In my experience, it's almost never about greed alone. It's about people who've told themselves a story where they deserve something, and then they start trying to make the story true. I've thought about my daughter in those terms since then. About the stories she may have told herself, that I had more than I needed, that she had worked hard, that this was just practical, that she was doing me a favor by taking care of things before something happened to me. I don't know what narrative she built, but I know she believed it enough to walk into my house with documents she hadn't warned me about. I have not confronted her directly, not yet. Leonard advised me to wait until my affairs were fully reorganized, which took about 6 weeks. My son knows everything. My daughter does not know what I know. What I do know is this. The house is protected. The will is clean. The power of attorney is with someone I trust. And whatever story my daughter has been telling herself, it has an ending now that she did not write. There are people who will read this or hear this and tell me I should cut her off completely. No contact, no second chances. I understand that instinct. Part of me feels it too. There are mornings when I sit on this back porch with my coffee, and I look at the yard that Loretta planted piece by piece over 20 years, the roses she babied and the Japanese maple she was so proud of, and I think about all the ways I did not protect myself the way I protected everyone else. But here's the thing about being 63 years old. You've made enough mistakes of your own to know that the line between a person who loves you and a person who has convinced themselves that using you is the same thing, that line can blur for people in ways they don't always recognize. I'm not excusing my daughter. I'm not minimizing what she tried to do. I'm saying I don't yet know the full shape of it, and I'm not willing to make a permanent decision out of a wound that's still fresh. What I've done is this. I've stepped back. I answer her calls sometimes and sometimes I don't. I don't go into detail about my finances with her. I don't leave her alone in the house. I watch. Loretta would have had something to say about all of this. She always knew how to feel two contradictory things at once without letting either one tip her over. I'm still learning how to do that. What I can tell you is that I stood in my dining room that morning in March and looked at documents I hadn't asked for, and something in me, some old, stubborn, quiet thing, said not today, and I listened to it. If you're sitting out there tonight, watching this from wherever you are, and you have a parent who is aging, or you are a parent who is aging, please listen to that voice when it speaks. It doesn't always yell. Sometimes it just says, wait, something is not right here. Leave the room. Listen to it. Because the people who love you will never need you to sign something in a hurry. And the people who hand you a pen before you've had time to read, they are telling you everything you need to know, even when they're smiling. My name is Vincent. I raised my kids to do better than this. I'm still their father, and I'm still here. I keep coming back to that moment at the dining room table, the way those documents were spread out so neatly, so prepared, like they'd been laid out for someone who wouldn't ask questions. And I almost didn't. That's the part that stays with me. I almost just picked up the pen. What stopped me wasn't suspicion. It was something simpler than that. It was the fact that I'd spent 63 years paying attention to the moments when something didn't add up, when the numbers were right, but the feeling was wrong. That's not instinct you're born with. That's something you build, slowly, through every hard decision you ever made and didn't run from. I'd learned to sit with discomfort long enough to hear what it was telling me. And that Tuesday morning in March, it was telling me to put the pen down and leave the room. There's a version of this story where I sign, where I'm tired, or lonely, or just grateful that my daughter's there and I don't want to make things awkward. I've thought about that version more than I'd like to admit, because the truth is, loneliness after loss makes you want to believe in people. It makes you reach for any hand that's extended, even if you can't quite see what's in the other one. That's not weakness, that's being human. But it's also where the danger lives, in that space between what we hope is true and what we're willing to look at clearly. What Leonard did for me that morning, picking up on the second ring, telling me plainly what those documents meant, not softening it, that was the kind of honesty that cost something to give. He could have waited until I scheduled a formal appointment. He didn't. And I thought about what it means to have people in your corner who tell you the truth, even when the truth is painful. That's not something you find by accident. You build those relationships by being someone who can be trusted with the truth yourself, by showing over the years that you won't shoot the messenger. My daughter made a choice that I'm still trying to understand. I don't think she woke up one morning and decided to become someone who would take advantage of her father. I think it happened the way most slow betrayals happen, gradually, through small rationalizations, through a story she told herself where she was the one being practical and I was the one being naive. That story let her walk into my house with a stranger and spread papers on my table and call it help. But here's what I know about choices. They don't stay contained to the moment you make them. They spread. They shape who you become, and so do the choices you make in response. I could have fallen apart. I could have signed out of exhaustion or confronted her with rage or let this break me the way grief almost did when Loretta passed. Instead, I sat with it. I moved carefully. I protected what needed protecting, and I kept the door open to the parts of the relationship that still had something real in them, even if I can't fully see what that is yet. That's the only thing I know how to do. Keep moving forward with my eyes open, my affairs in order, and enough backbone to leave the room when something is wrong. I'm still here, and I'm still paying attention.